Hi, everyone. Yes, my name's Rhiannon Sullivan. I'm the Vice President of Strategy and Business Development at Care2. So today I will talk very briefly in a moment about Care2 and what we do, but I want to focus less on sort of specifics and mechanics on the soft opt-in because we just had a great session just before this on that. And some of that was already covered, but I want to really focus on today about audience intent and how supporter behaviour is changing and why that matters specifically in a soft opt-in world and a sort of shifting consent landscape. I think as the sector moves into a soft opt-in world, what we really need to be thinking about is our relationships, our audience, where we're recruiting our audience from more than ever. And I think sort of particularly if we think about the last session we just heard as well, sort of worrying about sort of quality and email deliverability and things like that, this is where it really kind of matters. At the end of the presentation, I'm also going to briefly cover Care2 and what we're doing specifically on the soft opt-in and our platform. We're working directly with the DMA and in consultation with the ICO as well, so I'll get to that at the end. But first of all, just before we get into it, I wanted to just quickly introduce Care2 and what we do. We work with many of you in this room, but Care2 is our own audience, is our own platform. We work with many UK and US nonprofits, helping you connect directly to our audience through this is just some examples of some lovely UK clients we've got up here, through petitions and hand raisers. So we have a table out there. I have lots of handouts. If you want to talk more about specifically how it all works on Care2, come and grab me. I'm around all day. But I'm not really going to spend much of this session covering that. But do come and grab me, and I'll be very happy to speak to you about. But the focus of this session, and I really hope it's useful, is about this kind of the nature of what we need to be thinking about as we shift into a different kind of landscape with a shifting consent. So on that note, sorry, I'm changing two things at once here. So I wanted just to take a step back and think about kind of the digital growth model that we all sort of know. And I sort of understand this isn't necessarily new to folks in this room. But for years, digital growth has been built around sort of interrupting people at scale and finding people at scale. But definitely attention has become more expensive, it's become more fragmented, and definitely less durable. So the challenge is no longer simply reaching people at scale. It's really trying to reach people that already care. And I think crucially, reaching people where they're at. We had a Care2 event actually last week with some folks here. We're actually speaking at this. And a real theme that came back from this event last week was this concept of meeting people where they're at. And I think this is kind of really relevant as we talk through the shifting landscape and particularly with soft opt-in. So I just want to kind of spend a bit of time on this next slide here. Again, not necessarily new to folks in this room, but I think it's a really important lens to think about supporter actions are not linear at all. And someone's already said it, I think twice or three times in this conference, the ladder of engagement never really was a ladder necessarily. We think of it, we talk about it, and even more now necessarily the ladder of engagement, needs to be thought of differently. And it's important when we think about acquisition, consent, supporter growth, strategy going forward. Reality, people don't behave in a ladder. People move sideways. People jump stages. People might sign a petition and then donate 6 months later. Or they might, for example, donate through a fundraising appeal and then become an advocate. Or they might volunteer before ever subscribing to an email. So these are really, really important sort of stages to think about. And the point being there are multiple entry points into that commitment, of what that commitment is. And those entry points are really, really connected. So I think we can sort of safely say that growth is no longer really defined by kind of driving people officially down a funnel. And it's about creating opportunities for participation and belonging. And why this really matters when we think about the landscape we're going into now with a soft opt-in, when we're thinking about quality, where we're finding these people, what that audience is. And this is where I think we need to be thinking about it. So I thought it would be useful and interesting to take a complete step back out of our sector for a minute and look at some brand examples of where non-linear journeys are really, really successful. And I think, first of all, a really strong adjacent, like non-profit adjacent example is Duolingo. And I love this because their whole model is based around human behavior being inconsistent. They literally, and they don't punish you for dropping out necessarily. They're trying to sort of reward you. And so disengagement's not a failure, for example. They're purely designing for re-entry all the time. So I think this is a really kind of useful mindset for us to be thinking about in terms of supporter engagement. Patagonia, obviously not a new brand at all. Patagonia's been around for decades. But I think this is a powerful example because this relationship is definitely not linear. You know, someone can watch an environmental film or can read some content without ever buying something, or vice versa. So the whole point is the commercial relationship is secondary to the alignment. The other example I did just want to kind of call out here, which I think is lots of learnings for us, is Spotify Wrapped. This is all about behavioral data that we use. And what they've done that's different with behavioral data is they've made it reinforce your self-perception. They've made it all about your own identity. That's why it works so well. So these learnings about how behavioral data is it's most powerful when it's reinforced with self-perception. So obviously I don't need to say to anyone in this room about the values of taking action and petitions and hand raisers, and we all know that, and we're all here sort of, you know, that's an obvious sort of point. But really, what do they all do and what do they all have in common is they reveal values and they really reveal about your identity. Peloton, obviously another kind of non-linear model, users disengage, users lurk, users come back later, or, you know, for whatever kind of reason that's happening in their own lives. These are all happening, and these are all really successful brand examples of a non-linear engagement, and that they're set up for this. And the final example, I mean, Paul, you brought this up yesterday in your presentation about charity water. So that's quite interesting there, that I wanted to highlight this as well for the same reasons. This emotional continuity post-action, that it's not particularly linear, but it really extends that emotional arc. And it was a good question in your session, Paul, where someone asked, but what about their tech stack? What tools have they got to be using that? Which is definitely, you know, all of these things aren't going to be natural questions. But there are principles here that we can still learn from. And again, those principles, and I'm going to bring it back to the sort of what we're talking about today in a minute, I promise. But I think these are relevant examples. So to just come through and off the kind of the, away from sort of brands, but back to Care2. I've just got this action up here because it's a nice Care2 petition. It's not one of our client petitions, actually. It's by our Care2 team, but we was a very small cog in a wheel of supporting the Together Alliance March back in March. We got this petition up in about, I think it was 6 days before the march, to help drive participants to the march, and we had hundreds and hundreds of comments in getting that engagement. And I just wanted to share this lovely creative from the Together Alliance, because again, this is about really meeting people where they're at, building these movements and those moments. So again, not new to folks in this room, but you know, that psychological investment, we all know that those actions take, and really kind of thinking about the value of that and how important more than ever when we're looking about a soft opt-in world. So this is kind of one of the kind of key arcs I wanted to highlight in this sort of session, is that the quality of the audience absolutely kind of like shapes that downstream relationship. And in the context when there's a potential question over soft opt-in leads, how do they know I got here? What's the quality of these leads? What's our email deliverability like? The nature of the audience and where you meet your audience and where you meet them where they are has never been more important than it is today. And I think that moving forward, this is where you need to be thinking. So it's not just about mechanics and specifics of a pre-checked box or a not pre-checked box or things like that, but it's really about kind of reminding folks of the old model of the kind of classic awareness, conversion, retention, loyalty. And really, that the world doesn't really work like that. And it's actually about a continuous loop of sort of identity, alignment, participation, re-entry, dropping off, coming back, reinforcement, emotional continuity. And having all of these principles is where I think organisations will benefit most from the soft opt-in, and embracing the soft opt-in as an opportunity, because ultimately this is a real opportunity for the sector. But these are the first principles that I think that you should be taking when you're embracing it, and thinking about these versus necessarily sort of starting small. It's more thinking about making sure you're aligned with this messaging. Just some more sort of examples of some Care2 actions. These aren't running soft opt-in campaigns yet on Care2, but I just wanted to kind of pull these up again, because one thing with the Care2 audience and with the Care2 platform, supporters aren't arriving at the start, they're already arriving in motion. Having these, people signing, if it's, hand raisers, petitions, pledges, sort of any kind of issue participation. This means you're not reaching cold audiences. You're meeting people where they're at. Care2 is one example of where you can do that. You do that on yourselves, on your own platforms, but just having this really anchoring this first principle. So, it is an opportunity. I really I think it is a sort of strategic opportunity, and not to be thought of necessarily as, yay, more leads at a cheaper cost necessarily. Those things are obviously important, and that is going to be hopefully a real benefit for the sector to reach more people, and you'll be able to see some costs coming down. But in order to do that, it's about anchoring with these first principles first, of thinking about the audiences that you're reaching and those first principles and those journeys that you're finding. And then so just kind of coming back to this, I think, actually, what I wanted to just come back and, sorry, that's it. Yeah, so just reminding us of this slide. The most effective brands out there at the moment are no longer assuming people move through a clean, linear funnel from awareness and conversion and loyalty. And I think those organisations, those non-profits that are going to see the biggest success with the soft opt-in and a changing consent landscape are going to be not the number of people that they reach, but definitely who they reach. Okay, so obviously volume is still key. We all want more volume, and absolutely that is going to be a real benefit of us moving to the soft opt-in. But audience and who you find is going to be more important. To close out, to give you a kind of an update on Care2. So that session before us was great. We have been in talks directly with the DMA. The ICO guidance came out 3 weeks ago on how charities should implement it. So we've been just sort of going through that and getting them to just clarify specifically on some of the third-party comments that came from the ICO, which actually aren't conclusive at all. So I do recommend that you do speak to your own lawyers, and we've had feedback from the DMA that those aren't conclusive. So it's I'd hope to have the update for you by this session, but I didn't. But I hope that that's been helpful and got some sort of interest in got your mind sort of thinking about the changing consent landscape and what you can do.
Thank you, Rhiannon. And just to remind people, if you do have questions, to pop them in the Hoover app so that we can get those answered on stage for you. So something kind of that popped into my mind really, Rhiannon, was just thinking about kind of good practice and how we might recommend organisations look at the soft opt-in. Where do you think the largest risks are for the sector, and how do we mitigate them?
So I think the risks will be, I'm going to be controversial here. I think the risks are possibly not doing it, to be honest. I think the opportunity is a really strong opportunity, and actually it was lobbied for by the sector, and it was called for that it would actually increase revenue and annual donation revenue by 290 million in the UK. That was what the numbers were given by the sector when it was officially lobbied for. And I think although those that remember, and I'm showing maybe my age here, that there were some really bad practices out there before 2015, absolutely. But the key thing that people need to understand, that those bad practices wasn't actually to do with the nature of the opt-in. It was to do with the nature of, different channel behavior, but it wasn't actually specifically about the opt-in. The best practices, it's about your practice and your kind of audience, but I think sort of not embracing this is a potential risk to kind of decreasing revenue, but just thinking about these things first.
Thank you. And you've done a huge amount of work talking to kind of sector bodies on this issue, probably more so than anybody I'm aware of. Are there any pieces of advice or any trends that you're seeing coming out of those that are surprising or that might be useful for the audience today?
I think definitely, and the same advice was given on the last session as well, like making sure that you kind of like speak to your legal teams. Obviously, it's been really interesting. There's been some organisations that have embraced it really quickly, and there's some organisations that are definitely have been a lot sort of more risk averse to sort of bringing it on board. So that's been interesting to kind of understand. But I think, everyone has their different processes. And of course, the larger charity you are, and there are some different kind of practical things that you need to put in place.
Thank you. So just kind of getting on to kind of delivery of the kinds of approaches that you talked about today. How would you recommend kind of brands maybe without large budgets or without significant brand presence could implement those kind of approaches?
Well, I think you can do it. Well, you can do it now on your site already. So you can actually. I mean, the soft opt-in it's in place. It's been in law. It came to force on February the 5th. So I would we just heard of one organisation doing it, which is great. I would start, working with, starting to practice it right now, and start running ads, and get it up and running.
And in terms of kind of the larger, more holistic approach to kind of supporter engagement and the idea that people don't have that kind of consistent kind of marketing funnel anymore. How do you think organisations can go through and start to adapt to that world?
I think that's a really, really good question. I think so. It's kind of, I think this came up yesterday as well. It's like you've probably got the tools already of how to do it. Like you have the tech stack to do it. It's not about spending more money on new tools or doing anything like that. It's actually kind of just thinking what your measurements of success are looking like and what your kind of ROI is looking like and what you're thinking about that long term. And are you... So I think, and Catherine's session yesterday, you were talking about, the kind of the welcome journey, for example, everyone kind of looking at the welcome journey, what's happening in the first 4 weeks or 6 weeks of that welcome journey. Of course, that's important, but actually kind of extending that and actually thinking what's that continuous email journey looking like and kind of designing for that as well as just the first 6 weeks as one idea, I think.
And just with that model in mind, what kind of practical things could a charity kind of do differently when people go back to the office and start thinking about the way they treat their supporters? Are there kind of little tips or tricks that you can pass on from campaigns that you've seen?
I think just offering. I think all of you here do amazing work, and you've all got your kind of. I think the newsletter. Most people aren't doing that kind of newsletter approach and things like that. I think that's probably fairly sort of safe to say, but making sure, remembering that you have so much more content than you probably have. You have so much that you can probably repurpose, that you don't need to necessarily build out brand new content starting from scratch, thinking of this as something really overwhelming. It's something that you've probably already got, and it's simply a case of working with either your sort of agency consulting teams who you're kind of working with, or just in-house teams, and repurposing and reframing what you've already got to kind of simplify things.
Now, maybe a slightly more controversial question we've received is, would you just bite the bullet and change all your actions to soft opt-in? Or would you try to test one versus the other? I would definitely, if I was not working for the company I work for, if I was working for a non-profit, I would definitely be interested in testing for sure. Absolutely. I would want to test at a big scale though, for sure. I think that it would be really interesting rather than one. I think you need to start seeing like continuous soft opt-in leads and seeing what that journey is like compared to maybe some other kind of streams that you have. But I absolutely think that's a very valid and fair enough test to do if you're working for a non-profit and charity, but to do it at a sort of higher scale. Testing how those
supporters and how those people that have come in through a soft opt-in pathway or have come in through a sort of an active consent pathway, how they're performing on email deliverability, opens, clicks, engagement, donations, conversions, the whole plethora of that's what we're but that's what I'm saying. It's going to be a long, long test, and you've got to do it at a much higher volume to get some meaningful results if that's what you want to do. So I think, we heard again in the session before, there is some sort of strict areas that you cannot implement the soft opt-in in terms of, there was some areas in terms of the sort of commercial side of things on the retail side. So that, you may be able to kind of keep those sort of in that pathway, but I wouldn't resist it, is the kind of the point I'm sort of making.
Cool. Thank you, Rhiannon. So does anybody have any kind of final questions for Rhiannon? Because we've run out of questions on the app, unless my app hasn't refreshed.
I hope, was that helpful? Was it useful?
Well,
Great.
Thank you.
Okay.
And a huge thank you to Care2 for being one of the sponsors today.
Welcome.
So thank you.
Thanks.